is having vague language that can, in fact, be interpreted in different ways. Yes.
In the wake of the Gordon Fox resignation, it became clear that campaign finance accounts were being used or potentially used by a multitude of Rhode Island legislators or elected officials for personal purposes. Recently, legislation was passed that would, in a sense, force legislators to give check statements to campaign finance management, if you will, to the government. Should a candidate or an elected official's campaign checkbook be a public record?
Well, we testified on that legislation. We took sort of a middle ground. We said yes, because if it's solely a political account, it's not their personal account, then it probably ought to. It should be public. But we also noted that there are certain things that might be legitimately redacted. For example, Rhode Island's campaign finance law allows people to contribute up to $100 in a campaign without the recipient having to report it. And we think that's a very important thing. What it means is a person who wants to give a little money to a campaign but might face pushback, from an employer or somebody, can donate. They can participate in the political process without having their name out there. And so what we argued was if that sort of information is in your bank statements, that should be redacted. So there might be some things that it would be appropriate to be limited in terms of public access. But on a whole, if it's a political account, if you're providing this information anyway as part of your campaign finance reporting, we thought it made sense. The public ought to be able to compare and make sure that everything's on the up and up. Isn't that the whole point of doing this in the first place?
Well, in a similar vein, there was legislation passed a few years ago which required the publication, if you will, of anyone who promoted campaign material or material about an issue. And it was our take that you would have the same type of chilling effect on the free speech process. Where does that stand, and what was the ACLU's thought on that? Yeah,
we actually filed a lawsuit. There is a law that's been on the books for a long time that essentially bans any anonymous literature that is critical of a candidate or a cause. And, that was sort of amusing. You could be anonymous and say wonderful things about a candidate. You just couldn't say critical things about a candidate. So we filed a lawsuit, and a federal judge here in Rhode Island just a year or two ago ruled that it was unconstitutional. There has been a bill in the General Assembly to just take the law off the books. It's there, even though it's unenforceable as a result of this court decision. And we're hoping they do take it off the books because everybody acknowledged that the law was unconstitutional, but cities and towns were threatening to enforce it, and were enforcing it in particular circumstances.
This was the instance like it was in Smithfield,
That's correct. Yeah. Yes, and somebody was actually arrested for distributing anonymous literature, and the Attorney General, to his credit, said, "No, you can't do that." So they dismissed the charges, but the police chief there said, "Well, we're going to continue enforcing it anyway." So that's what prompted our lawsuit and a court decision to strike it down.
In a nation that was literally started by pamphleteers.
Anonymous pamphleteers, that's right.
We've reached that level. We've only got 6 minutes left. We all watch on a national level as the Patriot Act readies itself, or it's appraisal time. It's portions of it are going to sunset, portions of it may not. Talk about sausage. The elephant in the room, if you're at all a sentient political human being, is the Patriot Act. What are your thoughts on that? What issues? What's the most egregious portions of the Patriot Act to you?
Well, there are too many. There really are. I mean, there's been a lot of the discussion in the past month or so has been over this section known as Section 215, which deals with the government being able to obtain all sorts of information without a warrant. And the example that's often given, and it's accurate, is library records. If they're related to an investigation, the government can subpoena them. We're in an interesting time. Thanks to the Edward Snowden revelations, there's a lot more discussion than there has been in a long time about what the government is doing with this vast collection of data, whether it's all of our phone records, you name it, they're doing it. I'm hoping, if we can't get some reform this year on it, we probably ought to just throw up our hands because I don't think there's a better time, a better awareness among the public about just how vast and inappropriate the government surveillance of its citizens is at this point.
And this is another, I think, really totally nonpartisan issue. I mean, you get the Tea Party folks, you get the Libertarians, you get the Greens. I mean,
well, David Cicilline was actually fought and voted against, and actually bucked the Democratic majority on a couple of votes against NDAA.
So I mentioned the bills you have in Rhode Island Assembly right now are many and very variegated.
Yes.
If you could just pick two that you want to uphold, or two that you want to get voted out, what would be those two bills here in Rhode Island?
Well, certainly one bill that we would like to see passed, and a number of organizations are supporting, is a bill dealing with school suspensions. We've issued a bunch of reports, one most recently just a month ago, showing how over-suspended students are. I mean, you have elementary school students being suspended. I mean, literally more than 100 first graders, suspended.
First graders?
Yes, first graders are being suspended. It's like 70 to 100 each year. I don't have the exact numbers with me. And there's also a strong racial component to it as well. Racial minorities are disproportionately suspended. There's a bill that's been introduced that would say you suspend kids when you really need to. You don't suspend them for all these little things. The major causes of suspension in Rhode Island are for the offenses of insubordination and disrespect and disorderly conduct, whatever that is. It's not kids bringing weapons, getting into fights. It's all this little stuff.
Actual violence.
Yeah. So we think this is a very important bill because this has a ripple effect. You start suspending kids, they start losing interest in school, they drop out. It's a huge, this is where it starts.
Something we talk about
that's one of our important
frequently is that school to prison pipeline.
Exactly.
And that's really the nascent issue right there with the school to prison pipeline.
Absolutely. So that's certainly, in terms of passing something, we think that would be a very important bill. In terms of bad bills, there really are lots. I think what people ought to pay attention to are so-called computer crime bills that have been put in, a lot of them by the Attorney General, that have really broad ramifications for all of us, for innocent people.
We've only got a minute or two left. I'm going to name three names for you, all right, from the Civil Liberties History book, and I want you to tell me hero or zero.
Ooh.
Larry Flint.
Hero.
Julian Assange.
Hero.
Edward Snowden.
Definitely hero.
Wow.
3 for 3.
Ding, ding, ding. Excellent. How can Rhode Islanders, caring, as I put them, sentient, politically aware, non-troglodyte, non-mouth-breathing, knuckle-dragging Rhode Islanders actually support the ACLU and its mission?
Well, the first thing, as crass as it is, would be to join. You can go on our website, riaclu.org, and hit the join, click the join button, and become a member. I think that's, being able to say you're a card-carrying member goes a long way. The second thing is contact your legislators on issues that are of concern to you.
Well, thank you very much. This has been just one of the highlights of my short-lived radio career, if you will. We've been joined today by Stephen Brown, Executive Director of the Rhode Island chapter of the ACLU. Again, you've been listening to the Coalition on Talk Radio, AM 630, 99.7 FM, coalitionradio.us, of course, facebook.com/The Coalition Radio. Next week, join us in welcoming our newest sponsor, Halfway Tree Cafe, 150 Chestnut Street, best Jamaican food in town. Join us live tomorrow at the Rhode Island Convention Center, where we host the second day of broadcasting live on rifreeradio.org. Canacon, Rhode Island's Cannabis Convention. Thank you for joining us. Great programming week. We're going to see you again tomorrow, hear you again tomorrow, and we'll talk to you again next week. Thanks for joining us.